collective agreement. Mr. Speaker, it goes on to talk about some of the different arguments that were used here in determining whether it was a contracting out or whether it was a selling off of a part of the operation. Mr. Speaker, it refers to some of the case law that was used as well in different jurisdictions. And it talks about that genuine subcontracting does not attract successor rights. At least it didn't before in this province. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Labour Relations Board in this decision had to look at whether a distinction must be made between the sale or transfer of part of a business and contracting out work for legitimate purpose. At the end of the day, in the decision, the Labour Relations Board decided that what Acadia had entered into with Marriott was a valid contracting out. So Marriott was not under any obligation to accept the collective agreement that was in place for those employees when they worked for Acadia. But the Labour Relations Board went on a bit further, and it argued, in this case, it was very clear the Labour Relations Board wasn't pleased with the argument that the union was trying to make in overturning what was clear labour law in Nova Scotia and in so other jurisdictions on the issue of contracting out. It goes on to say in its final paragraph, those who wish to outlaw contracting out must have recourse to the legislature or to their own collective agreements. This board cannot be expected to overturn the established principle that contracting out is lawful in some circumstances. Such a decision would have the effect of de-establishing years of labour relations practices followed in this province and reflected as well in other Canadian jurisdictions. So in this case, the Labour Relations Board basically said they were not prepared to see what they felt was a valid contracting out as attracting successor rights. And what's jumped out at me is when they talk about those who wish to put an end to contracting out and not attracting successor rights, that their only recourse is through the legislature. Which leads me to wonder, is that what's coming next from this government? A new interpretation of contracting out? Because this decision really flies in the face of the Minister of Labour saying, don't worry, it doesn't apply to contracting out. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I think what's important as well in this case, and I think it's important Nova Scotians draw their own conclusions. I won't try to draw them for them, but members of the House, and I think Nova Scotians may be interested in who represented the unions in this case. Mr. Speaker, it was a gentleman by the name of Ray Larkin who made the argument that contracting out should attract successor rights. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Larkin's the same individual who appeared before law amendments to say there was nothing to be concerned about in Bill number 100. Mr. Larkin is the same individual who sat on the Premier's transition team when he formed government. Now, Nova Scotians will draw their own conclusions. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it's because of those reasons I believe employer organizations are extremely concerned about what the impact of this will truly be. And Mr. Speaker, there are other elements as well in the Bill number 100 which are cause for concern. We've heard many of my colleagues have already talked about Labour Management Review Committee, how it will be structured. I know now the government has brought in some language to try to change the scope of who they will need to consult. But still, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that these employer organizations who represent almost 80% of Nova Scotia employees who are not under any collective agreement or union representation are left out from sitting on this Labour Management Review Committee. They won't be at the table. Instead, the Premier says they'll have to go talk to you, but you won't sit at the table when they're making recommendations to the Minister of Labour and to the government. One has to ask, will they be talking about contracting out and a new definition of what that means? Will that be part of some of the discussions that take place. So, Speaker, I'm told that on the issue of successorship, there's possibly only one other Canadian jurisdiction that has this, is the province of Manitoba. So one has to wonder, why is it that we need it here in Nova Scotia? The Premier recently has said it was a campaign commitment. We're left asking, to who or to whom? I don't remember seeing it in that pamphlet that he sent out. He only had a few commitments to start off with, but I don't remember putting in successor rights in labor law in Nova Scotia was one of those commitments. So we're left to wonder, whom did he make the commitment to? Was it to Nova Scotians, or was it to his friends in the union leadership that have provided his election coffers with so much funds over the years? Is that who the commitment was made to? And if that's the case, then let him at least be transparent and tell Nova Scotians that's who the commitment was made to. And let Nova Scotians draw their own conclusions. Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we've had, for the most part, labor peace. I think that's something Nova Scotians are proud of. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, in my community, we had to go through the strike at the Clearwater live lobster holding facility in Cape Oget. So, Speaker, if someone had told me, because considering that my mom's family is from Cape Oget, it's a small community off of Arishat. I think it's probably got less than 100 people. If someone had told me that we were going to see the riot police in Cape Oget, I would have laughed. But lo and behold, here's a bus full of Mounties coming out with German Shepherds and riot gear in Cape Oget. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it attracted more people there to take pictures than anything else. I'd say there was more people there to take pictures than there were protesters. Amazed at the fact that a little place like Cape Oget would see riot police marching and smashing their batons on their shields. What a sight. Mr. Speaker, that was a very unfortunate incident for us, and it was one that unfortunately did turn rather unfortunate in what took place. And I can tell you it left a black mark on our community for many years. It's something that we certainly don't look forward to seeing again. And I don't think any community in Nova Scotia wants to see strikes and wants to see labor unrest. But yet, here we are debating a bill which could bring significant labor unrest to our province. And yet, those who we trust to put Nova Scotians to work, to run companies, who've received government funding in the past to run companies, are saying that they're alarmed. And yet the Premier responds by saying they're disingenuous. That's his response. Very unfortunate, Mr. Chair. And the fact that the government has dug its heels in and said it's our way or the highway leaves Nova Scotians wondering what truly is at play here and what truly is the goal. Because, Mr. Speaker, I know that other members have raised some previous legislation introduced, whether it be from the government House Leader, the member for Cape Breton Centre, while in opposition, whether it be from the Premier himself when in opposition, that all seem to relate back to what we're seeing here today. Mr. Speaker, there's a reason those bills weren't called back then. There's a reason why Nova Scotians should be concerned with what we have before us today. One of the other issues that has been raised is wanting to put in a preamble in the Act. Now, most people would wonder, now how can that be relevant and why are you guys upset about a preamble? Well, Mr. Speaker, as a lawyer and having heard the presentations that have been made, whenever there's some confusion with an Act, the courts and the Labour Relations Board may often look back to see what indicators are there as to what the government's intention was here. And the preamble in legislation can often be used when there's areas of confusion to make a determination of what government's intention was. That's why, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to the bill on texting while driving, and I raised the issue with the Minister of Transportation about what is the meaning of operating a motor vehicle and being on a highway in that Act. And I had hoped that the minister would have stood in his place and clearly indicated what his intention was on that, because if there was any confusion in the courts, they could look back to see the comments from the Minister of Transportation on that very issue. Because as I've said to you before, Mr. Chair, the courts have looked at the debate in this House as part of their decision making. For those who may have forgotten, I mentioned the case against the decision to put a cap on minor injuries in Nova Scotia. In that decision, the courts actually, quote, debate here in this House on the minor cap and what its intent was. I'm one of the individuals quoted. I believe the Minister of Finance may have actually have been quoted in there as well. He doesn't think he was quoted. Well, I think he was quoted to show that he was completely opposite to what the rest of us were saying on that, but there were other members quoted as well in that decision. So it just goes to show you, Mr. Chair, the work we do here isn't just for today, it's the implications it will have tomorrow and how even the courts will look at the debate we have here. So adding in a preamble makes it clear that this could have a significant implication on how the courts would interpret any areas where there may not be clarity. Again, one's left to wonder, why is this showing up in a bill to unify labor boards in this province? This is a significant change to the labor laws of Nova Scotia that were not part of any consultation. And one has to ask, Mr. Chair, as we're going through this process, what benefit is there for most members of the government to see Bill 100 go through? Does the member for Lunenburg West think he's going to get more votes next time because Bill 100 went through? Is there anyone sitting in Guysborough, Sheet Harbour, thinking that Bill 100 is going to improve their lot in life and really addresses the concerns they are facing right now? You know, what benefit is there? Instead, they're the ones who are forced to sit here, keep quorum in this House for what's going to be a lengthy 2 weeks or more. And the question they have to ask at the end of the day is, what has been achieved? And what benefit can they go back home and look at their spouses, look at their family and say, here's why I'm sitting here 10 hours a day or more listening to this, because I really believe in a preamble for the Labor Relations Act. You know, I really believe in successor rights. You know, and the member for Truro Bible Hill says she does. Good for her. I can tell you in Richmond they don't. They really don't. But employers who are saying they're concerned, the people of Richmond are concerned about that. Look, you know, when you hear the member for Halifax Citadel say you don't believe in respecting contracts, you know, Mr. Chair, they accuse us, and the Premier accuses labor lawyers of being disingenuous, and then you get a comment like that. Speaker, I can tell you I grew up in a family with my father being very involved in the labor movement. And I've always had respect for the labor movement, parts of the labor movement, I should say. Mr. Chair, my father was the chair of the Carpenters Union local in the Strait area for many years. And his reward for that was in the 1990 election, the Cape Breton Trades Council came to Richmond County to announce they were going to be spending a significant amount of union money for the NDP candidate while I was running for the Liberals. So that showed me what the union leadership actually thought of its own membership when you saw them coming in. But it's unfortunate at the time there wasn't video cameras, because they actually held a meeting at the hall in West Arishat. And unfortunately, the meeting lasted approximately 3 minutes. And then those who were there from the union took off in their vehicles, and I think there's no better way than saying but ran away, because they certainly did not like the reception they received from their union brothers and sisters. That term seems to be very loosely used in the union movement to fit certain purposes, that being a prime example of that. Mr. Speaker, this is not about respecting agreements. It's not about being against the union movement. It's about making sure that our province moves forward on any changes to labor laws in a constructed form, in a form where people feel that they've been heard, that people are aware of the changes being made, and that they would support that. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, this clearly has not been done in this case. And you're hearing it more and more, and every day we stay in the House gives more Nova Scotians an opportunity to be aware of the concerns with Bill number 100. Every day gives them a new opportunity. Those who are watching at home right now on Ledge TV have the opportunity to see what is the government hiding. Why would they not bring forward amendments, or why would they not remove the specific clauses that have been raised as concerns? Because as far as having a unified labor board, which we believe should be called Employment and Labor Board to represent both sides, there's no issue. So for the government members who are sitting there, while the cabinet ministers get to go to their offices and have to sit here and keep quorum, they have to understand that there's an easy way out here. And the easy way out is just remove the contentious clauses, and the rest of Bill 100 can keep moving forward. So there's an answer here. But this is a party that said they'd do things differently, yet instead has dug in its heels and is refusing to budge on this. So what was amusing was today that the Chief of Staff for the Premier, Dan O'Connor, went in and told the Halifax Chamber, well, if you have amendments, we'll look at them. Well, we already went through the law amendment stage. That's where we already heard the presentations, and the government referred the bill back to this House with only a few minor government amendments. The question now is, when would we even entertain amendments in this House? Because once this bill moves out of the committee stage, it then goes into third reading. And I believe it would take some exceptional circumstance to allow amendments at the third reading stage. So the amount of time even available to make amendments is passing us by. So today, if the Premier and his Chief of Staff were sincere, when the government House Leader stood in his place, he could have called different business. He could have said, okay, we're going to hold debate on Bill 100 because I've asked the employer representatives who are concerned to send amendments for us to consider. So we'll do other business in the meantime. I think that would have been sending a clear signal he was serious. Instead, the government House Leader stood up and called Bill number 100 again. So here we are. We're going to go till 10 o'clock this evening. Possibly some will have to stay a little later than 10 o'clock after last night's experience, to be talking on a bill that the Premier would have employers believe that he's prepared to hear amendments on, which makes it very difficult for us to continue to debate on Committee of the Whole House when the Premier's invited amendments that are being drafted apparently as we speak, the government hasn't looked at yet, and yet we're expected to continue having the debate on this bill. Speaker, I've lived through heavy debate. Well, the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, I believe my colleague from Cape Breton North refers to him as the member for horses, but he's shouting over there that we could move our own amendments. Well, he sits on the Law Amendments Committee, and unless he wasn't there at the time, we did move amendments, and they were all rejected by the government. Well, you know, he says that I moved deleting things, and that's not moving amendments. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, and I'm told that he taught political science. Now, I'm not sure what political science course that he was teaching, but, you know, Mr. Speaker, when you're drafting amendments, when you're looking to amend a bill, whether you're looking to add language, whether you're looking to delete, it's an amendment. So we introduced our amendments. Oh, is it now he wants to know if it's a constructive element. Oh, amendment, constructive amendment. Oh, so now it's changing. So now it's, before it was an amendment because it was delete. Now it wasn't a constructive amendment, I should say. Well, you know, I want to apologize to the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, that on behalf of employers and on behalf of the 80% of Nova Scotians who are not under a collective agreement, that our amendment was not as rosy or as positive as he would have wished. But unfortunately, we were basically presenting it on their behalf. So if he's Now, unhappy with that, I would encourage him to contact the Canadian Federation of Independent Business or the 18 other organizations that wrote to the Premier and tell them, look, how about next time sending us some more happy amendments to our legislation and not the word delete. That's a very, very hurtful, negative word in the eyes of the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island. Mr. Speaker, that's the rules that the government's been playing. You know, say, oh, well, why don't you bring in some amendments? They had their chance. They shot down every amendment that we had, every amendment that the PC caucus presented. Those were amendments that were reflections of the presentations we heard from employer organizations, and they were all rejected. And the message again today from the Halifax Chamber of Commerce is, why don't you remove the contentious provisions, let the bill pass, unifying the boards, and then undertake a consultative process and make sure that there is no confusion here, or that we can have some language there to make sure. Possibly they may ask for language to solidify contracting out based on the Acadia decision that I referred to earlier, and the fact that in that case there was a challenge to the whole notion of contracting out and whether successor rights should apply. I think that the employer representatives will be reasonable and will look to try to find some common ground here to make sure that, as they have said, labor peace can be maintained in our province. But again, we are under the British parliamentary system. We have a majority government. Very clearly that means there are more on the government side than there are on the opposition side combined, and our independent member. So the government will be able to pass this bill as it is. I'd be curious again as to whether the member for Eastern Shore, what benefit his constituents will see from this, if he can go and tell them, I stayed in the house Monday night till midnight, Tuesday night till at least 10 o'clock, Thursday night till at least 10 o'clock, Friday night till 9 o'clock because of Bill 100. You know, maybe he can explain that, and that he feels it's justified to stay here these hours. Because while the cabinet ministers will go to their offices and will go do their work, is the backbenchers that will be required to stay here and keep quorum. I can tell you, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, I lived through Bill 68. Bill 68 was a Conservative government. It was legislation that would have taken away the right to strike from nurses in this province. And I've seen sitting 24 hours a day. In case this government is contemplating going to that, if they feel that that is going to scare us, go ahead. Go ahead. Call it 24 hours a day. It's not going to make a difference. A majority government that feels it needs to call hours 24 hours a day for a bill that you've got 80% of employers that are saying that they have concerns with, fine, so be it. We've always had concerns about how cozy the relationship's been between the NDP and unions. This merely solidifies it. The concerns Nova Scotians had that an NDP government would be too cozy with the unions, up to now, I think the government has been clever in avoiding that perception. With this one, they're exposed. The clothes are off, and we're seeing exactly what really is going on. I remember a time when Rick Clark used to sit in as a member of the NDP caucus. He sat at their caucus table. Oh, if the member from Pictou East doesn't believe it, he should ask some of his colleagues with a few more years than him in this legislature, and I'm sure they will tell him. Oh, well, Brother Rick used to be a member of the NDP caucus and would sit in under caucus meetings, and it's only once that it became known to Nova Scotians that the NDP ended the practice. Now, with this bill, one has to wonder, you know, has anything really changed when it comes to that? Now, Mr. Speaker, we're at a time where Nova Scotia is at a critical point, I would suggest. We have a Minister of Finance who keeps telling us how we need to change the way we do business if we're going to be able to deal with the fiscal realities that we have with our aging population, some of our fact that we're not reproducing at the rates of that we're losing people. And yet here, rather than trying to find ways of how we can promote private enterprise, how we can grow our economy and encourage investors and encourage our companies to want to find new ways of employing Nova Scotians and keeping their business here, we're instead passing a bill which many of them feel will do the exact opposite. So you can't have it both ways, Mr. Chair, of saying, you know, you have the Minister of Economic Development who keeps standing and saying how great they're doing at growing the economy. He's never been able to table actual numbers yet for what he said. I think my colleague from Yarmouth was very responsible in asking him to table documents showing exact numbers to back up the comments by the member for Halifax Citadel. And even the minister himself, instead he gets these answers where it's clear the minister understands that this is question period, not answer period, because there are no answers, and that just goes to that minister's credibility, and time will clearly erode that with every day that he gives those kind of answers, but that's up to him as to whether he wishes to leave this place either with credibility or without, but that will be his choice. Mr. Speaker, clearly Bill 100, as I said, there are options. The government can take out the contentious provisions, pass the parts of unifying a labour board, which employers and unions have said they agree with, and then let the other contentious provisions go for further consultation. But not doing that, Mr. Speaker, as an opposition, we only have one option. And that one option is to exercise our parliamentary rights. And I should point out, Mr. Speaker, that I know this is very frustrating for the government backbenchers especially. Many of them will have never seen these delay tactics that have used before. But I think it's important that they realize, and they may want to talk to the Minister of Agriculture, for example, because he's been here since I've been here. But I can tell you, other than the tactic by the government, the PC House Leader today, that one was new, I have to say. I hadn't seen that one done yet. But every other delay tactic that you have seen on this bill has been compliments of the NDP party, teaching us how to do that in this House. I sat here and watched Robert Chisholm, John Holme, Kevin DeVoe. The fact that I can recite what can be put as amendments on second reading and third reading are compliments of those gentlemen. Because never before had I seen the Conservatives make that type of amendment. I hadn't seen the Liberals make that type of amendment. It was always the NDP. The Minister of Finance, he was a little bit late coming compared to the Minister of Agriculture and myself, but he came a little bit afterwards and he saw them for himself. So when the government members are wondering, where did they learn about ringing the bells and asking for a recorded vote on these motions? These are all tricks we learned from the NDP. A John Holmes special. John Holmes special. Robert Chisholm special. How to move an amendment on second reading and third reading. I know there's a book from the late Art Fordham, God bless him for putting that together, but in many ways, those two gentlemen could have written a book on parliamentary procedure as well, on delay tactics, on how to frustrate government legislation. I would say they were almost quasi-experts at doing it. So when the member for Pictou East says they were brilliant, I hope he'll think of that when he's here at 10 o'clock tonight, or whether it be 11 o'clock tonight or at midnight, that he'll comfort himself with that. And when he's here on Thursday night that late, he'll comfort himself with that. And Friday night, he'll comfort himself with that. And next Monday, next Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, he will comfort himself with that as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important because I fear that especially the government backbenchers may have been misled in exactly where Bill 100 is going. I know, Mr. Speaker, that some thought we'd be finished debate on this last Friday. They did. They asked me. That's how I know they didn't. Some felt it would be done yesterday. I'm sure some thought it would be done today. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair. But we've only begun. We've only begun. 20 hours of Committee of the Whole is only the beginning. At third reading, there are a number of options. And I want to assure the the members, especially the backbenchers who are required to keep quorum, that we will exercise those options. We will exercise them at every opportunity. Because, Mr. Speaker, when those who drive our economy tell us that they have serious reservations about this Bill 100, when those who have expertise in labour and employment law in the province of Nova Scotia say that these are unprecedented changes to the labour laws of Nova Scotia without consultation, we will stand in our place and we will speak on their behalf. And we will do what we can to force this government to go back and consult with the very people who will possibly face negative effects from this legislation. It is true, Mr. Chair, we probably all have better things we could be doing. But at the end of the day, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to make sure that we keep Nova Scotia competitive, that this is a place where our province can grow, that we have labour laws that are not only there to protect employees, but as well that we have a government that is promoting growth in our province, not putting more red tape and putting restrictive covenants on employers of this province. Mr. Speaker, there is a way out for this government. There's a way they can do it. I would say not only saving face, but showing leadership. They can show leadership by saying, we've heard the concerns of the opposition, we've heard the concerns of the chambers of commerce, we've heard the concerns of these employer groups, and we're going to do what possibly other governments would not have done. We are going to change the legislation. We will put through the non-controversial portions of it that everyone's agreed to, and we will go back and consult on those matters which are causing concern to Nova Scotia employers and to Nova Scotians. I would suggest to you, Mr. Chair, that would be leadership. It would take that. Having a premier that calls groups that raise concerns with legislation disingenuous is not leadership. That's not what Nova Scotians voted for. He didn't act like that when he was leader of the official opposition. Why is he acting like that now that he is premier? Unless that is that there is something to hide here and that there is more to this than what is being sold to Nova Scotians. The easy way to avoid that accusation is to withdraw the provisions that have been of great concern. That is the easy way to do it. If not, then the backbenchers hopefully are really on side with Bill number 100 and convinced that this is the right way to go, because they are going to be hearing myself and many of my colleagues for many more hours speaking on behalf of employers, speaking on behalf of workers, and speaking on behalf of the people we represent. Because Bill 100 is only a start. When a government starts moving forward with legislation that has provisions hidden in it that were not part of the consultation process, one has to ask, what will they do next? And what other legislation will they try the same thing with? Mr. Speaker, that's not what Nova Scotians voted for. That's not the way to govern, and I can assure you that that is certainly not a better deal for today's families. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to stand today and contribute to the debate and hopefully help the government recognize that there is some value in doing what people have been asking them to do. And that is, first of all, to review the process that they've gone through, and to review that with a lens of the 70% of Nova Scotians who are not members of a union. To view that through the lens of the small private businesses who employ non-unionized Nova Scotians, and to use that lens to determine if, in fact, the process was complete. And if the process was not complete and was not all-encompassing, then to take the time to do it right. We have a responsibility in this House to make sure that we look at legislation that is good for Nova Scotians. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we keep Nova Scotians well informed of the intent of the legislation and to make sure that they understand the impact that any legislation that we pass will have on them. And sometimes in haste, pieces of legislation do get passed without that full and complete understanding, and without people who are impacted by the legislation having an opportunity to understand it and to speak to it. And I would like to say that it's become very obvious with this piece of legislation, Mr. Chair, Bill 100, that there are more questions than answers. And that sends a signal to us as opposition. It should send a signal to the government, and I know it does to some members, that there are still unanswered questions. And as a government, if at the end of the day you want the legislation that you pass to be understood and to be well received and to be supported, then you do it right the first time. I've heard members of the opposition say that, well, if it's not right, we can repeal it. Well, to me, that is a sign of failure. If you have to start repealing things, then why not take the time to do it right? And if this legislation is as right as the members of government believe it to be, then I would suggest they put it to the test. They put it to the test of the people who need to know and who are impacted by it. And so I think the delay that is taking place here is legitimate, because I think it's asking the government to take a sober second thought. They have a chance to do it right, or they have a chance to do it wrong. And it appears that their intent is to push it through, and perhaps, Mr. Chair, that would be doing it wrong. We know that these are not just housekeeping amendments. We know that this bill has a major impact on the labour laws of this province. And it affects up to 70% of Nova Scotians who are not unionized. That's a huge percentage of Nova Scotians. And as a government, I would think you would want to have that 70% on side. And one of the ways to get them on side is to consult with them, to inform them, to help them understand. And chances are, when those 3 steps have been taken, that 70% would be on side. I want to speak a little bit about the situation as it relates to my constituency, Colchester North, which is a very rural constituency, and many small businesses, many private contractors who employ perhaps 3, 4, 10, 15 people. They're small businesses, and their employees are not unionized, but they are dedicated, hardworking, committed to their employer, and get recognized and rewarded by their employer. Those people are completely left out in this process. They have not been consulted, and this legislation has the potential to have a negative impact on them and on the relationship that they have with their employer. You know, I think the government is to be commended on what they say this legislation will do, and if in fact it does what they say it will do, then kudos to them. It says, and I would be the first to acknowledge that, and I hear somebody speaking about that, I'd be the first to acknowledge that if this legislation is good for Nova Scotians, kudos to the government. My question is, why not take the time to make sure that it is good for all Nova Scotians, and then we will all celebrate, and all Nova Scotians will move forward. But there seems to be, unfortunately, a bit of a hurry and get this through. And that is what's causing people to be anxious and to be concerned. The mandate of this government is to represent, the mandate of any government is to represent the entire population of the province. And 70% of the province, as I'm saying, Mr. Chair, has been left out. And their concern is with what they don't know. And, you know, we've heard from unions, we've heard from businesses, we've heard from individual contractors, we've heard from membership in the union who really have a lot of unanswered questions. And so, Mr. Chair, I don't know what kind of briefing was done with the membership, but I have concerns that perhaps the briefing with the membership was limited or non-existent. And so they are wondering, and they deserve to know. You know, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are concerns because of the presentations that were made at Law Amendments. And for the members on Law Amendments Committee, or for those of us who sat in and heard some of those, many of those small businesses are the lifeblood of the community in which they operate. And they employ many of the people in that community. And they are fearful. And there is an old saying, you know, in the absence of information, people think the worst. And that is exactly what's happening here. In the absence of information, those people who don't know for sure what impact this will have on their business are thinking the worst. All the government needs to do is to be open and honest and transparent, which is their language, be open and honest and transparent with those 70% employees and their employers, and let them know the real intent here. And if in fact it is all positive, then they have nothing to worry about. But as I said, in the absence of information, they are thinking the worst. And they came to law amendments because they wanted to get that message through to the members of government. We've had phone calls, we've had emails, we are continually hearing, and one of the reasons why the delay is so important is because it is giving those people time to get their ideas and their questions forward. Now, it's been said to me by a member in the opposite, actually a member of cabinet, a discussion with him the other night, and the question was, why aren't your people here? I'm telling you, the 70% who are non-unionized, who are the small contractors, can't take their employees off the job and bring them into Halifax and have them sit in the gallery or have them tramp around and protest. They have a job to do, they have a living to earn, and that's why we're not seeing them. But that doesn't mean, Mr. Chair, that they are not concerned, and that doesn't mean that this government doesn't owe them a responsibility to explain things to them. We have information from some, and I want to share that with the members here. An example is Graham Baxter from Baxter Heating and Plumbing in Cambridge. He stated that the job losses that have occurred in Kings County mean that jobs such as the 90 to 100 jobs that he offers in Kings County are very important. And this is what I'm saying. Small communities, small businesses, employing the local people in the community. And he's fearful. And so are the 90 to 100 people who work in that small business. Under Bill 100, Mr. Baxter claims he has owned and operated his own business for 33 years. And he believes that this bill will put business in Nova Scotia out of business. And he is truly fearful. He has built up a family business, one of which he's very proud, and he's concerned. He doesn't know the full impact, and that's all he's asking. What will be the full impact? There was absolutely, he says, no consultation on the measures in this legislation, especially considering the effects that it will have on his company and other small businesses. It's a small ask of someone who really needs to have comfort and needs to comfort their own employees. JC Mechanical in Truro. Been part of a family business since 1971. And they have stated that their company has worked on government contracts for years, and I know that. A well-established company. Perhaps the member from Hants East would already recognize JC Mechanical. They're concerned. He states that his government has worked on his company has worked on government contracts for years, and the provision in regards to successor rights will prevent him, he believes, from working on government contracts again. Now, people in opposition will say, no, 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 that's not true. What needs to happen is he needs to understand that if it's no, no, that's not true, he needs to know that. But right now, in the absence of information, he's thinking the worst, and he's seeking information, and he's seeking time to get the answers so that he will be comforted if, in fact, this will not have a negative impact on his business. So I'd be glad to do that. The second statement.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second statement from Mr. Corlett from JC Mechanicals, Labour Management Relations Committee has no representation from open shop businesses, although they represent 70%. These are his concerns that he has expressed to us. And he also is at a loss to explain why there was no aspect of a fair labour strategy included as part of the economic development plan that was put forward by the NDP. So these are...
Excuse me, Honourable Member, but there is somebody in the chamber that's using a cell phone. I would ask the individual to remove himself, or we will remove the cell phone. The Honourable Member from Colchester North has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another small business from... I wasn't speaking on it, Mr. Chair. From Merit Contractors. She's talking about her sheet metal business, and she's saying that there has never been any consultation with her about successor rights, deposit fees, or the makeup of the Labour Relations Committee. And she quotes the minister as saying, Minister Moore is about to break the backbone of this province. That's a quote from Minister Moore, from Ms. Cruikshank regarding Minister Moore, and referring to the effects that Bill 100 will have upon the state of small and medium-sized business. So, Mr. Speaker, I would be glad to table those, and those are the comments from a few of the people who we have heard from who are concerned about the impact that this will have. Now, Nova Scotia has been very fortunate, Mr. Chair. Nova Scotia has been very fortunate in that we have enjoyed some peaceful labour relations in this province over the last 20 years. And we have very high respect for all members of the workforce in Nova Scotia, be they union or non-union. And in many cases, Mr. Chair, union and non-union folks work side by side. And they do that in a very collaborative and respectful way. And we do not want anything to interfere with that harmony that currently exists. And we know that all we're asking the government to do is to delay Bill 100 so those processes that we talked about can unfold, and that the harmony between those two union and non-union working groups will continue. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I've had an opportunity. I have been a member of union all during my career in education. And as a member of the union, I enjoyed the benefits provided me through negotiations that the union did on behalf of teachers. I appreciate and I enjoy and I respect that. And during that time, Mr. Chair, I had an opportunity to work beside non-unionized workers, between people who had contracts with the school board, and in every case, it would be hard for you to tell who was a member of the union and who was not, who was a contractor and who was not. And that is a working environment of which I think we can be, and we certainly are, very proud. Now, those in education who have gone on into management positions, Mr. Chair, will understand that things become a little different, because with the teachers' union, when you move into a management position, you still remain a member of the union. And the challenge for those of us in administration was to make sure that we were able to separate ourselves from the union and from management. And when you sat down at a table to look at an issue that might have need resolution, an issue that was affecting the learning of students, it was very clear that you took your union hat off and you worked on behalf of the best interest of students. And you sat across the table from a union advisor who came out to represent the teacher. And you had the rights of the teacher and the rights of the student both on the table. And for those of us who were in a union and who were in management, it was a challenge. But every time, Mr. Chair, people in management and administration in those circumstances respected the union, but they would err on the side of the child. And any management educator or administrator who did not do that couldn't sleep well at night, Mr. Chair. But that was a struggle for members of the union to play that role. And there were times when members of senior management and administration wanted to opt out of the union and become protected by some other group because of the challenge and the struggle that was presented. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we do understand that having an environment where union and non-union folks work side by side is certainly preferred. And it's also, Mr. Chair, something that we believe can be achieved. We believe it can be achieved through some very, very simple steps on the part of this government. Will not cost anyone a cent, but will buy a lot of support for something the government is trying to push through. And the harder the government tries to push through, the greater the anxiety and apprehension and concern and suspicion grows. And I go back to that old saying, in the absence of information, people think the worst. Now, I think, Mr. Chair, that the delay that we have caused as a result of debating this bill has been beneficial to some people in our province because they've been listening and it's helping them to understand.
Order, please. The chatter is getting very high in the chamber and it is very difficult for the minister for me to hear the member. I would ask that the members who have conversations to take them outside the chamber and allow the member to have her say. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was talking about people learning as this process is unfolding. And probably some of the people who are learning the most about the bill are the people in the back bench, the people in the caucus of the NDP party, people who had not heard, seen, or understood anything about the bill, and who would have gladly voted for the bill without fully understanding its intent or its impact. And I would expect, and I hope, that they are better informed as a result of the debate and the discussion that has taken place here. And for that, I think they should be thankful. I think they should be They need to be better informed because as constituents are asking questions about the bill, it's kind of nice that the MLA knows what they're talking about. And one of the ways for the MLAs to become informed is to pay attention to what's being said here in the House. And I believe that they will be stronger and better MLAs and better received in their community when they can answer the questions that we are raising. And it was mentioned earlier today, and I'm not sure what the government will do, but I think it would be important for this House to hear from some of the members who may have something to say about the bill. And if that is the case, then I think everyone here would welcome that, because the way the bill was presented, the briefing that was held by the minister certainly was not complete, and it was not detailed, and it spoke very little to some of the hidden messages in the bill. And the question, Mr. Chair, is not only what did the members of that caucus understand, but in fact, what did the minister understand? Because the bill briefing certainly avoided the contentious issues within the bill. And it's only through the work of the two opposition parties and with the information that's been raised by the business community out there that we're now trying to dig out what was really there. So I believe that anyone who has been listening, either in this House or out in the communities, is better informed because of the debate. And for that, I believe the opposition parties need to be congratulated because they have made it happen. You know, Mr. Chair, we asked both opposition parties put forward amendments. And you know what happened to the amendments. So my concern, Mr. Chair, is that if there is some reason why this government is not interested in listening or not interested in clarifying, not interested in allowing people to have input, not interested in consultation, then it begs the question, why not? You know, we've heard members from the government side talk about needing this bill. We've needed it for 9 years. Well, they were elected 18 months ago, but now all of a sudden they've introduced a bill and it's got to get passed now. So that certainly raises more of those concerns that in the absence of information, people are thinking the worst. This is a wonderful opportunity for this government and this premier to show the leadership that they were asked to show when they were elected. A great opportunity to say, listen, folks, we do need to consult more. We do need to hear from those people. We weren't aware of the concerns that you might have had. We will go out and we will have full consultation. We will listen. And you know, Mr. Chair, at the end of that process, there will be a stronger, better, and more well-received piece of legislation once that process has been followed. So let's let the Premier take leadership, show leadership, be transparent, do what he says he's going to do, and that's consult. Do what he says he's going to do and listen. And at the end of the day, when the voices of the people have been heard and their issues have been brought to their attention, those will serve only to strengthen the legislation. And I go back to our intent here in this House. And our intent and our purpose and our responsibility is to make sure that that legislation, when it is passed, is the best possible legislation for every Nova Scotian. Not for leaders of unions, but for workers in this province who are respected, hardworking, dedicated people who deserve to be listened, who deserve to be respected, and who deserve legislation that will allow them to continue to work in harmony, side by side, regardless of whether they're union or not, regardless of whether they're big business or small, regardless of whether they employ 3 people or 300 people. But that's what we need if we are going to be successful, if we're going to be progressive, and if we're going to move forward, Mr. Chair, in this province. We need a united workforce. And the legislation that's before us right now, Bill 100, has the potential to divide the workforce into the 70-30, and that is nothing that this province can afford. As I said, we have had the luxury and the good fortune, and something of which we can be very proud, is a very strong and united and harmonious workforce, and a relationship with unionized workers that is respected and respectful. And the concern that we have is that all of that will be destroyed, and that we will be faced with unrest, labor unrest, because we have provided a piece of legislation that will serve to destroy, to tear down, and to separate 2 segments of the workforce, simply because of a union strengthened and a union dictated piece of legislation which does nothing to address the 70% of the people who make this province successful. So, Mr. Chair, in closing, I would simply ask the government a very simple question. They've been asked to do this before. They've not done it, but nobody can understand why. And the question is, will they slow down? Will they consult? Will they inform? And will they listen, so that when they bring forth a piece of legislation, it is a true reflection of what people in this province want and what they believe is in their best interest? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin by saying that Bill 100 has generated so far a lot of discussion, and probably will generate a lot more to come. Mr. Chairman, for those who have been following this debate, the issues are complex and confusing. You know, when I hear some of the labor lawyers, you know, as far as I'm concerned, they're the real experts in this field that understand exactly what this bill does. And they have different views on what this bill does. Well, naturally, that certainly raises concerns with the general public. And at the same time, we have a government that's determined to get this bill through the House. Mr. Chair, my biggest concern that I have on this bill is the confusion that surrounds this bill. You know, everyone, and I'm sure there's many people out there that haven't been following the debate. Many people that have been following the debate are wondering exactly what this bill does. So I want to take the next few minutes to talk about the confusion that has been created around this bill. On one hand, you know, I hear the Minister of Labour saying there is some confusion about the effect of this piece of legislation that she introduced earlier in this session. So, Mr. Chair, let's start with the Minister's comments that there is some confusion around this bill. You know, we've heard the government accusing and blaming the opposition for spreading misinformation on this bill. Well, let's ignore what the opposition had to say. Let's look at what others have to say about this bill. You know, allow me to begin with what Leanne Hashey had to say. She's with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And she says, you know, there are respected labor lawyers who have looked at the proposed law and have varying interpretation of what it all means. Now, that's an interesting comment, Mr. Chairman. You know, as far as she's concerned, and I'm concerned, you know, when I look at the labor lawyers, the experts in the field, you know, they have different opinions. They have varying interpretation of what this bill means. So, Mr. Chair, when the experts, you know, as far as I'm concerned, from in this field, when you have a group that believe this piece of legislation does something, and you have a different group that believes, you know, differently, then certainly you can start understanding where this confusion will certainly continues to grow. So, of course, no wonder at the offset of this debate, you know, there has been confusion, and of course the confusion continues to grow. So at least, it's easy to understand at least one point's very clear, Mr. Chairman, wondering, you know, what exactly does this bill do? Mr. Chair, while the confusion continues and this bill continues to move through the House, yes, this bill has gone through second reading with limited debate. Yes, this bill has gone to law amendments to allow the general public a say on this piece of legislation. And we know, especially my colleague, the honourable member from Richmond that sits on the Committee on Law Amendments, earlier indicated to the committee, Mr. Chair, through you, before this bill was referred back to the House, back to the committee, there were some amendments that were proposed by both opposition parties, and unfortunately, none of those amendments were accepted by government. So the bill was referred back to the House, back to the Committee of the whole House on Bills, where members have a chance to debate this bill for a maximum of 20 hours before it moves to third and final reading. Now, we've heard the Premier pointing out and said on the record that, you know, he wants to see this bill through. Well, you know, Mr. Chair, the government has the numbers, they have the majority. So regardless of what the opposition has to say, or yet what the general public has to say on this bill, regardless if they have concerns, you know, the Premier's determined he's going to see this bill through. So, again, you really have to ask yourself, you know, something here that we don't know. So, anyway, meanwhile, the government does nothing to clarify some of the concerns that were raised. Now, I'm not convinced, Mr. Chair, that the confusion will go away once this bill is passed. You know, I think this is only the beginning of the confusion. You know, the government certainly has many opportunities to address some of this confusion, and the Minister of Labour certainly has, you know, different options available to her. And I'll go over some of these options later on, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm quite sure that once this bill does become law, you know, instead of clarifying what this bill actually does, you know, I'm quite convinced from just what I've been hearing in the last week or so, the opposite will happen. More confusion will begin. You know, when you have the experts on one side and you have the government, you know, on the other side, and then you have the general public and businesses and labor groups, you know, everybody else, you know, trying to understand, again, what this bill does. And nobody seems to be able to agree, you know, exactly what this bill does. Then I believe that the Minister of Labour, when she says, you know, the confusion that has been created around this bill, she truly doesn't understand the magnitude of the confusion that this bill will create. So, Mr. Chair, wouldn't it make sense to you, for the government, for the minister, to clear up some of this confusion that's before this House, before this bill is passed. There's an opportunity, but yet I see no one. I see no one from government in addressing some of the concerns, some of the confusion that has been raised. The government must be getting the message. With everybody coming forward opposing this bill, it would be easy for the government to take the lead, take some actions to help clear the confusion around this bill. Leanne Hachey with the CFIB, would like the confusion to be cleared up. And I'm sure there's many, many people throughout our province, Mr. Chair, that would agree with Leanne Hachey, that would like this confusion to be cleared up before this bill is finally passed by the House and becomes law. So, Mr. Chair, seeing the different interpretation by the labor lawyers, by the experts, and the government should do something, but yet we have seen nothing so far. We've heard that businesses were not consulted on many parts of this bill. It's never too late to slow down and consult. Obviously, why the NDP government is not willing to consult raises, more questions. We have the minister saying there is confusion around this bill. We have the experts, saying they have different interpretations as far as what this bill represents or what this bill means. We have Leanne Hachey and we have many more that would like this confusion to be cleared up. And we have the NDP government determined to get this bill through the House. And then we have a lot of people in our province, Mr. Chair, left wondering what this bill does. So why is the government in a hurry to get this bill through? We know that the government House leader has called the House to sit extended hours, to sit and to get this bill through. Again, I don't know about you, Mr. Chair, but with all the confusion around this bill, I can see problems arising in the not-so-distant future once this bill becomes law. If the experts don't agree with what this bill does, then why is the government not working with them, to bring clarity, to address some of these concerns? Mr. Chair, our Liberal caucus believe before this bill is passed by the House, the government needs to clarify Bill 100 and consult in order to reach a consensus. This would give businesses, it would give Labour the opportunity to reach a common ground on this matter. Mr. Chair, this would be extremely helpful to help everyone who's wondering what this bill does. Mr. Chair, I want to refer to a letter. This letter was, it's an open letter sent to the Premier dated December 6th, yesterday, matter of fact. This letter is signed by the Atlantic Building Supply Dealers Association, the Atlantic Recreational Dealers Association, the Canadian Council of Grocery Distributors, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Canadian Restaurant and Food Service Association, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Construction Association of Nova Scotia, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, Halifax-Dartmouth Automobile Dealers Association, Merit Contractors Association of Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia Automobile Dealers Association, Nova Scotia Chamber of Commerce, Nova Scotia Home Builders Association, the Office of the Employer Advisor, Offshore and Onshore Technologies Associations of Nova Scotia, the Restaurant Association of Nova Scotia, the Retail Council of Canada, the Nova Scotia Natural Gas Association, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to make reference to the opening paragraph. You know, these associations, Mr. Chairman, represents a lot of workers, a lot of businesses in our province. So when, you know, these different associations, these different groups, you know, raises these concerns with Bill 100, it's not the opposition raising these concerns. You know, these are the different groups. So, Mr. Chairman, you know, I would hope that the government, that the Premier and the Minister of Labour would pay attention to these concerns that are being raised. And it says, Mr. Chair, on behalf of tens of thousands of employers in Nova Scotia, we are writing to continue to outline our strong concerns with the Labour Board Act and its potential impact on the province's small and medium-sized independent businesses. It is our hope that you will only move forward with the piece of the bill that the public was consulted on. Merging 6 existing labour and employment boards into one new labour board and remove the pieces that the public was not consulted on. Well, I think it's quite clear, Mr. Chairman. Looking at all these different groups telling us that there was no consultation on certain pieces of this bill, then the obvious question is, you know, that comes to mind is why the government did not want to consult on these certain areas of the bill. I don't know why the government refuses to consult on certain areas of the bill. Maybe, Chair, maybe you know. Maybe you don't know. You know, it would be interesting to see if the government, the Premier, the Minister, somebody to stand up and tell us why there was no consultation on these certain areas or certain clauses of the bill, as these different association points out in their letter. You know, maybe the Minister of Labour could tell us why the NDP government don't want to consult on these certain areas of the bill. You know, we heard that the Minister in her opening comments on second reading of this bill, yes, the government did consult. They did consult, as these associations point out in their letter. There was some consultation done. But, you're right, but, you know, again, why the government refuses to consult on certain areas of this bill, I don't know. So maybe the government, maybe government members, maybe somebody, before we actually see this bill go through third and final reading, maybe somebody will clarify and tell us why the government refuses to do any consultation on certain areas of the bill, as they clearly lays out in this letter, Mr. Chair. So when I go back to my opening comment, when I said that the Minister of Labour says there is some confusion around this bill, I agree with her. I fully agree with her. And I'm sure if we did some polling around this province, the minister would probably find out she's not by herself, you know, agreeing that there is some confusion around this bill. Maybe the minister has contributed in creating some of this confusion around this bill. Maybe if the minister, you know, allows time to consult and clear up some confusion in order to reach consensus, you know, this would give businesses and labor the opportunity to reach common ground on this matter. Yet, it's more confusing to understand why the government did consult on certain areas of this bill and did not consult for some other sections of the bill. You know, trying to figure this out, why the NDP government would do this, I don't know. I truly don't know. I certainly would appreciate somebody, could provide us with some clarification. Then all of us, all Nova Scotia would once and for all find out why the government consulted with certain clauses of this bill and refuses to consult on others. Now, we've heard after this government was elected, Mr. Chairman, they wanted to be open. They wanted to be accountable. They wanted to be transparent. Well, it's kind of interesting. They failed to preach, or practice what they're preaching. So when you're talking to the businesses, when you're talking to many people throughout our province, trying to explain to them why their government fails to consult them on the entire bill. Of course, many are left without the answers, of course. So again, maybe the Premier, maybe the Minister of Labour could tell us and tell us here in the House and tell all Nova Scotians why they refuse to consult on these other areas of the bill. Now, Mr. Chair, I just want to go to the last couple lines of this letter that I made reference to that was forwarded to the Premier yesterday by the different associations. And I quote, "This is why we are asking you to remove the pieces of the bill that the public was not consulted on until businesses in Nova Scotia have the answers that they deserve." Now, I don't think that's asking for too much. So again, Mr. Chair, we know there's more than 30,000 small businesses in Nova Scotia. And I'm sure that all these small businesses would appreciate some clarification on what Bill 100 means for them. All businesses, not just small, but all businesses in Nova Scotia would appreciate or would like the government, clarifications on what Bill 100 means to them. And I'm sure all businesses would like the government to delay the passing of this bill and clear up some confusion around this bill so everyone, once and for all, would know what this bill does. Now, the government can do many things with this bill. They have many options to consider. The government could decide to introduce amendments at this stage. It's never too late. You can introduce amendments when a bill is before the Committee on the Whole House on Bills. That's a possibility in order to try to clear up some confusion around this bill. The government could decide before moving any further with this bill to put this bill on hold and allow some further consultation on this bill. Now, the government knows they could request the House to send this bill back to the Committee on Law Amendments and to allow the general public have a second kick at the can, Mr. Chair. Have a second opportunity to come before law amendments and make presentations raising their concerns, looking for clarifications exactly what this bill represents and means to them. So, Mr. Chair, the government could, forward this bill back to law amendments if they so wish. We all know with unanimous consent of the House, anything is possible. So that's also another possibility of sending this bill back to the Committee on Law Amendments. The government could also decide to leave the bill on the order paper or to withdraw this bill completely and reintroduce a new bill in order to clarify what this bill is supposed to do and stop the confusion that this bill has created once and for all. This practice has been done on occasions, in the past, where government has reintroduced a bill after concerns were raised on the original bill, where the general public raised concerns on the existing bill. Government has, for different reasons, have reintroduced a second piece of legislation to address some of the concerns. So we're not rewriting history. This has been a pretty well established practice of the House, and I would encourage the government to at least consider this. Now, Mr. Chair, the Nova Scotia Chamber of Commerce has also expressed concerns over Bill 100. The Nova Scotia Chamber of Commerce comprises of 33 Chamber of Commerce and 6,700 businesses from around the province. So I would say they certainly regroup many, many people. And they too, Mr. Chair, they too are requesting that the bill be delayed, allowing for proper consultation to take place between government and the business community. Mr. Chair, the government fails to understand that many people have concerns around Bill number 100, and yet they are doing nothing. They are doing nothing to address these concerns. Mr. Chair, why is the Minister of Labour refusing to have further consultations on this bill? Or yet, remove certain pieces of this bill that the public was not consulted on. I'm sure everybody would like to know why the government is refusing to have further consultation on this bill. Mr. Chairman, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce also opposes this bill. The President, Valerie Payne, said this bill looks to have moved far beyond that intention and, most importantly, without any consultation with the business community. And she goes on saying even further, the Chamber would like to see the bill delayed and rethought. Well, as I've pointed out, beside the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, there are many different associations, many different groups that would like government to certainly delay the passing of this bill. And yet, the government, the Minister of Labour, failed to understand that many people, many businesses have concerns around this bill, and yet they're doing nothing to address their concerns. Mr. Chairman, when you look at the public outcry so far, and I say so far, because basically the outcry has only began in the last week or so on Bill number 100. And I'm sure this public outcry will keep mounting in the days and certainly in the weeks to come. So when the government is not interested, and I'll repeat, when the government is not interested in removing certain pieces of this bill that the public was not consulted on, when the government is not interested in listening to what others have to say on Bill number 100, we have said, our Liberal caucus has said, and we believe before this bill is passed by the House, the government needs to clarify Bill 100. So once and for all, everybody will have an understanding exactly what Bill 100 does. But unfortunately, without further consultation without the government telling us, what this bill, or clarifying what this bill does. Unfortunately, this confusion, I'm afraid to say, as the Minister of Labour has pointed out, will just keep on growing. And unfortunately, Mr. Chair, the confusion probably will continue to exist once this bill goes through third and final reading and becomes law. As I've pointed out earlier, when I look at the experts, some of the Labour lawyers in our province that have different interpretations exactly on what this bill means or represents, then to me, that certainly is a recipe for disaster. So what will happen in the days to come, Mr. Speaker? I don't know, but I can certainly assure the Minister of Labour this confusion, unless somebody steps forward and tries to make, brings clarity and clarify certain things, I don't have too much confidence at this stage. This certainly would give businesses and Labour the opportunity to reach a common ground in this matter. Further consultation, just leave the bill on the order paper. We've seen in the government before, Mr. Chairman, reintroducing a new piece of legislation in order to address some of the concerns that have come up. So this is not reinventing history, Mr. Chairman. This is, as far as I'm concerned, it's good government policy. By listening, if they meant what they said early on, that they would be an open, accountable, and transparent government. Well, the member opposite, Mr. Chair, I fail to disagree with him. But from, talk to these different associations, talk to the different chambers of commerce, and Mr. Honourable Member, you will probably find that's not quite exactly what you are practicing, even though you are preaching of being open, accountable, and transparent. People are calling upon you. We need to consult. They don't agree with certain parts of this bill. There was no consultation. Yet, I have to give you credit. The government did consult on certain parts of this bill. And I want to acknowledge that. And you have to be congratulated. But the business community is saying, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, there are certain areas of this bill that they have not been consulted on. And that certainly creates and brings confusion around this bill. So, Mr. Chairman, with those few comments, I will take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honourable, the member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was caught off guard there a little, Mr. Speaker.
We noticed that, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me. And anyway, I was caught off guard because I had Christmas on my mind. And I'm trying to get Christmas on my mind, but in this house, it's a job to do that. Now, I'll tell you why it's a job to do that. Because of this Bill 100. And I've been listening to it for 2 or 3 days now about this bill. And I am pleased to be able to stand up, but I just stood up here a little quick and I got to catch my breath. I'll get a little life in me here in a minute. I need some cold water, by the way. I'm not going to speak about unions. I mean, I'm in favor of unions. I'm in favor of associations. I'm in favor of this bill, sort of. But we're trying to understand why this bill is going through this house so fast. Why is it being shoved through? The unions and the government has had, Mr. Chairman, 1.5 years to deal with this bill. It was pushed before us a few days ago for us to look at. And I haven't, for 158 clauses in it, I haven't even got through the clauses myself. I've taken it home a couple of nights just to try to get through the clauses and haven't got through them yet. I've talked to lawyers home on the weekend that haven't looked at this bill yet with 158 clauses in it. I've talked to small businesses that didn't even know this bill was coming before the House this past weekend home. But I never had much of a weekend home because my phone rang quite a few times concerning this bill. I mentioned that this government's had a year and a half to look at this bill, and probably the union leaders have too. I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's been months. I'm sure it's been weeks or months, maybe not a year and a half, but it's been quite a while. So I think all we're asking for is some time. You know, I'd like to have a little time to take some answers home this weekend and over Christmas and try to answer some of these questions, because I can't answer them, and I don't know if there's anybody across the other members across the room here can answer them all. Because I've been waiting for somebody for the last 2 days to get up over there and speak. I don't know why you just didn't then when you had a chance, somebody. I've asked everybody on this side, why doesn't somebody over there and get up and speak for 10 minutes about this bill? I don't understand that. So anyway, I'll try to speak about this from now till the interruption at 6 o'clock, which is 25 minutes. I want to speak about this, and I want to speak about small business that I care for. You know, I've been in small business all my life. You know, I care about small business people, especially the small business around home. We're all small business people down there. We're all fishermen and fish buyers, and I don't know if there's a union in Digby, Annapolis. For sure, I'm sure there's a few union workers there, and that's good. They're in the hospitals and they're in the schools, and everything's going along clickety-click. But we got small businesses calling. What is this bill going to do to me? What is this bill going to do to small business? Bill 100. And I can't answer it, like I said. But I want to tell you, there's 70% of the people that work for small businesses in this province. I started a small business when I was 7 years old. I was 7 years old when I started my first business. And I'll tell you what I started on, how I started it. I had 5 sisters born before I was, and they had a CCM bike, a 28-inch CCM bike with a V in it, not a crossbar on it, a V. So when I become 6, 7 years old, I kind of inherited this bike, and I rigged up a cart on the back of it. This was my first small business venture, 7 years old. I would go along the ditches where the alders were with my bike. Listen, I had this bike. The only problem with this bike, it never had no tire on it. Never had no back tire. So my father was a fisherman. He was a small business person too. Wasn't in a union or nothing. None of them fishermen were in unions then. We get into associations after a while. I'll talk more about that later. But my father had some trap rope there, some old steam-tired trap rope then. So I took 4 or 5 turns of that and went around the rim with it and put a knot, tied her right tight, and kind of made a rope tire. But every time that went around, it went ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump. The tire did. She was hard riding, but I'll tell you what I done with that bike, and I couldn't get up on the seat of it. I stood down in the V of it with my hands up on the handlebar, and I rode that bike with a cart behind it, and I pedaled that bike 3 or 4 times a week, 5 miles or better, and picked up pop bottles and beer bottles. And you know what I done? I bought a brand new bike in 2 years by doing that. That was my first business. Then I thought I'd go bigger. I'd get out of that. I went to a rowboat then, small business. Went to a rowboat and went out in the passage after schools and started jigging for codfish. I done that for 2 or 3 different summers. I done that.
Codfish?
Yes, got a penny a pound for them or whatever. I ended up buying quite a little boat by the time I was 12 years old. So I get into the lobster business then. 12 years old, I get into the lobster business. And the minister across there is nodding his head yes, because I believe he can tell the same story pretty much. 12 years old, I'd get down after school and I'd haul my lobster traps every night. This time of the year, right now, this time of the year, I'd be just might be getting in by now, an hour after dark. And I'd done that every night before Christmas, 12 years old, and I always had money enough to buy my sisters something for Christmas, my whole family, 12 years old. And a fish officer caught me one night because I wasn't licensed. Not that I didn't belong to a union or anything. I never even had a license to go do this. So the fishery officer, Herbie Kosovo, met me that night on the wharf, and I had half a bucket of lobsters. I was ready to go to the bar with him, and he caught me. He said, Junior, Herbie Kosovo. He said, have you got a lobster license? I said, Herb, no, I got no lobster license. I just fish. He said, you should have a lobster license. So we sat down on the edge of the wharf, Captain, in the dark. Well, there was a light, street light or something on there, little light, and he wrote out this little pink slip for me and signed his name on it and gave me a lobster license. He said, Junior, that'll be 25 cents. I said, Herb, I haven't got 25 cents. So he gave me that paper and patted me on the back. He said, Merry Christmas, because it was just before Christmas. And that's the first thing I belonged to, and it wasn't a union, but I belonged to the government then, I guess, the government of the day, because they made me belong to something I didn't even know what I belonged to, but I didn't care. I was in business. So it went from there. I mean, I just went on, and I just kept growing and growing and growing, and I never looked back until I get into this 7 years ago, and I've been looking back ever since. But anyway, it's just getting back to this bill. I guess I'm still on to the bill. I believe, Mr. Chairman, it's business I'm talking about. You know, we belong to associations. As we come up through the fishery, we get into associations, and I thought that was great. We tried to get fishermen involved. I was the president of the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association for a few years, and I worked with the Minister of Fisheries for a few years down that way. He belonged to an association, but we all pulled together, and we went through a period before we come into this house, the minister and I, called the Marshall decision. And that was a period in my life that I seen that a Supreme Court made a ruling for Donald Marshall saying that he, or the First Nations, the Union of First Nations, could fish unfettered. And that meant that nothing could stop him. And that was the Union of First Nations. The Supreme Court made that ruling. But the fishermen got up in arms at that time because of what that union received. And the fishermen get up in arms so bad that time, I don't know if I got to tell that story because I know every one of you know the story. Down home, it didn't go as bad as it did up in New Brunswick and Burnt Church in that area, but there was nearly a war. There was a physical war went on because of what that union received from the Supreme Court. And that got so bad that there was fear of people dying from that. Because that's been mentioned to me. I'm bringing this up because that was mentioned to me this weekend, that a feller brought that up to me, a feller fisherman, that what happened when that union, the Union of First Nations, received that unfettered condition that they could do anything they wanted. Down in Western Nova Scotia, we got together when this happened. And you know, the first thing we done when we heard that news was we went to the chiefs, sat to their tables, drank coffee, and we started talking. And we consulted, and we talked back and forth. In the same time we was talking and trying to work this out with each other, in Burnt Church, they was fighting tooth and nail, fist, hammer, gun and shovels. They weren't talking. They just had their unfettered ways there, that union, and that's what it created. It created a physical war, a dirty war. But down to the western, we worked and we worked it out. And we ended up working it out so well with the First Nations people down that way that we were asked to go to Burnt Church. But we decided not to. It wasn't our home turf. Down to the western, it was our home, it was our people. We knew how to deal with it. But we've got that back to the Supreme Court. That's what we worked at. And the minister's over there nodding his head. He knows exactly what I'm saying. That went back to the Supreme Court of this country. And the Supreme Court took that unfettered clause out. That's what they done. Now, I'm not sure what's in these 158 clauses in this document, but I'm sure there's something there unfettered. I believe there is, because people's telling me there is. Now, I don't know how far this will go or what will take place here, but really all that's being asked here tonight or this past few days is that we have time to look at this. Let's take the time to do this before we see something happen like in Burnt Church. I don't know if that'll happen, but that was brought to my attention. And when that was brought to my attention, what happened up there, it certainly brought back some hard memories. We went through a peaceful time down in the western. We thought we was in a peaceful time down there dealing with this. But the Minister of Fisheries over there can relate to this. And for 3 months, I lost 10 pounds myself at that time. My phone didn't stop ringing. It never stopped ringing. I couldn't get clear of that phone. And it was fishermen, night and day, night and day, night and day. And I just hope that this don't turn out to that. It started a little bit this weekend, but the people are just getting to hear about this. And I don't know how much fear is going out there. There's fear there because of the unknown. There was fear in the Marshall decision because of the unknown. You know, so that's what I'm worried about myself, and for what could happen because of this Bill 100. When you talk to lawyers, I talked to a lawyer who hasn't even had a chance to look at this down home. You know, that's going to take the time, sometime, hopefully before Christmas, but can he do it before Christmas? I mean, Christmas is coming on here, so that's what we're asking for, Mr. Chairman. All we're asking for is a little time here to take a look at this. I mean, we have bills to galore here. We have bills. We have I don't know how many bills is on this order paper. We have Legal Professions Act. We have the Personal Health Information Act. We have the Conflict of Interest Act. We have the Tanning Beds Act. I mean, that's important. We don't want our children under 19 years of age being harmed from these things. I mean, that's a very, very important bill that we could be looking at right now while we put this 100 bill on hold. That's all for a while, till January, whatever, till people get to look at it. We got the Motor Vehicle Act. We got the Education Act, Handicapped Persons Act to look at. Very, very important bills. But it's not going to happen because this so-called filibuster going on here. They're looking at 100 hours of ways to stop this, to let the people we're trying to give the people some time, the lawyers, the small businesses some time to find out what's in this. So all the time we're going through this filibuster, and we could be going on about the we could be debating the Education Act, the Handicapped Persons Act, the Nova Scotia Museum Act, the Weed Control Act, the Animal Protection Act, the Motor Vehicle Act again, the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter, the Clothesline Act. That's a good act. It's a great act. I love clotheslines. I can tell you a clothesline story. It hasn't got a lot to do with Bill 100, but these bills are all here. These bills are all here, Mr. Chairman, and they all need to be looked at. And the clothesline. I was young then, probably when I started my business. When I was 7 years old, and my uncle next door kept cattle. He kept some cattle next door, Uncle Harley. And on the other side of us was a lady, and she was mean sometimes. She would chase us out of the yard and stuff. So one day she called Uncle Harley, got him over there. There was a couple cattle in the cattle. There was a couple cattle in her yard. It wasn't even really in her yard. They was in our yard, but she didn't want them around. She had her clothes out on the line. And she had the clothesline attached up to the outhouse, up and back, probably 100 feet away from the house. And the clothesline was on, was attached to the outhouse. And the lady next door went up to use the outhouse when Uncle Harley come over to get the cattle. So we seen her. I was kind of hiding away. I was kind of nervous of it. So Uncle Harley started driving the cattle, and he happened to drive them right towards the clothesline, and the clothes were hanging on the clothesline. So the cattle caught their horns in the clothesline and pulled the outhouse down on its door. and she was inside of this outhouse. I just run myself. But anyway, she get out of that outhouse. She come out through the bottom of it. She come out through the bottom of the outhouse. So, but the moral of the story is be careful where you hang your clothesline. Be careful.
Order, please. I'd ask the member if he would get back on to Bill 100.
Oh, Bill 100. I'm sorry. Well, I was just going through the bills. I was going through the bills that need to be looked at. Because of the clothesline bill. I'm just telling you be careful where you put the clothesline up. That's all. I'm being careful. That's all I'm trying to say. But there's bills for second reading too that we could be doing instead of filibustering this bill here before Christmas. And all we're asking is for some time, just for some time for small business, the small business that I represent in Digby, Annapolis, and the lawyers that want to look at this, just some time. And we could go on. Look, there's bills here for second reading. The Summary Proceedings Act, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. Very important bills. The Lobbyist Registration Act, the Municipal Government Act, HRM Charter, the Heritage Property Act, the Adult Learning Act. I mean, there's Occupational Health and Safety Act to amend, all due for second reading. And we're sitting here talking about clotheslines and toilets because we have to filibuster this bill that we don't. I don't know a lot about this bill. I'm a fisherman. I'm a small businessman. But I'm listening. I'm listening to the people, the lawyers, the businessmen that want to learn about this. And they don't know it. They ask me about this bill. And all I know is it's a labor bill. And it seems like, and I'm being told by lawyers that it could be dangerous. It could give the union leaders wide sweeping powers that could take control, that could... Why? Listen, I just said a while ago, why doesn't one of you get up? Look, you got 8 minutes here. One of you get up over there and explain it different to me. Explain, one of you. Just why don't you? That's all we're asking here for. I mean, it's not asking for a lot. It's not asking for a lot for I mean, because this bill, we can go on and on and on. This bill has got nothing to do. Look, we have problems. We've got alders in our ditches down home in Digby, Annapolis. We've got the 101 not finished down there. I mean, we're looking for more doctors, and we're looking for better social programs, and where's the answer to this? Why aren't we debating this stuff? And then people in Digby, Annapolis are looking for this is a socialist government that they thought would be better for social programs. Where's the better social programs? The union in Digby, Annapolis, there's not a union down there, I don't think. I don't believe. There's just small businessmen all trying to make a small living and to feed their families and to keep their old cars going and to keep their kids fed and to have a Christmas this Christmas to make their children happy. Bill 100, 85% of the people in this province do not understand it. And there's 14,000 people children in this province living in poverty. And we're sitting here trying to filibuster a bill that we don't even know anything about. Why? Get up over there and tell us about this bill. Tell us about this bill that will help us. Will help us get new roads in Digby. Will help us get the alders out of the ditches. Will help us feed the children that are hungry. Fill the food banks. Make better community services down there. I mean, that's what our people want. They don't want us in here wasting time on this bill that we don't even know anything about. A road down there, every day I get a call. Where's our 101? 36 years, no 101 highway. Cars on our doorstep, taking the doorsteps right off our houses, more and more of them every day. That's the calls I get. I don't get calls about two union leaders getting power to, but I'm getting them now. I'm getting them this past weekend because people don't understand. If we had 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, the middle of January, to find out a little more about this, and while we're putting this on hold for 3 or 4 weeks, get all these other bills I've been mentioning here that are good bills, clotheslines and all, tanning beds, all of them. We could get them through this House because we're all for these bills. They're all pretty good bills that we believe in. So if we can take the next week and do that, we'll accomplish something in this House. But if we get stuck on this Bill 100, I'm telling you, there's people around here looking for a way to go 100 hours to get up and talk foolishness like I'm talking. And that's what's going to take place. And the taxpayers of this province is paying $20,000 a day for us to do it. That's what's going on in this House. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. That's common sense. Where's the leaders? Get the leaders. I hope they're in a room somewhere tonight, coming to their senses here and working this out. One of them already is. But we need to come to some kind of a compromise. When I said at the beginning of this, we had a problem. We pretty near had a war in Western Nova Scotia. Pretty near had a war when the Marshall decision came down. The first thing we done down there, the first thing I done, the president of the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association, I picked up the phone and I called Frank Muse, the chief of Bear River First Nations. I called it. And wasn't 2 hours, I was to his house. And it wasn't 2 days, the minister and myself and 3 others was to the tables in Yarmouth with every chief drinking coffee and working it out, negotiating. And all the same time, the ones who wasn't negotiating the other end got in a war, was in a fight. Because we got our energy together and we negotiated. And that is something that's not happening in this House. And if it don't happen, I'm telling you, if there's a trouble that I'm being told that's in this bill, that could be in this bill 5 or 10 years down the road, we may wish that we went to the tables and had a cup of coffee together and got this straightened out. That's what we may wish.
Order, please. I wonder if the member would consider adjourning debate as we're approaching the hour of interruption.
Yes, I'll adjourn debate, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
We've now reached the hour of interruption.
Order, please. Thank you, Sergeant of Arms. We have now reached